Generally, I always start with how you knew you wanted to be a broadcaster, but for the past few months, I've been starting with what has the start of the season been like for you?
Well, for us, it's been very different, and for us, it's been really fits and starts. We got underway. We had 3 games, and then the Phillies were basically off for a full week, and then play a game with New York the other day, and then the hurricane comes through, and so it's been tough to develop any kind of a new routine so far, and obviously it's a new world for us, so we're just kind of going day by day and making the adjustments as we go.
I know you talked about the new routine that you've had to go through because of obviously getting a few days off unexpectedly because of a positive test, and then you had the whole hurricane thing. Have you gotten a chance to really sit down and kind of get started with the season, or is it still kind of very new to everybody?
Yeah, it feels a little bit new. We're still kind of working through some of the kinks. The Phillies have only played 1 game away from home so far. So in terms of broadcasting, we're not traveling. So we have to do those games off a monitor. And it's been interesting to, we kind of have to, we're kind of still learning what works for us and how to use the technology best to our advantage. And we're actually not going to play another road game, I think, until the 17th of August. So, or something along those lines. It's basically they're going to play 16 of the first 17 games at home, which is quite a lot. And so it'll be a while before we get the full scope of how hard it is to do from the road, do it off a monitor.
Everybody has had these different setups in the booth, and we've seen a lot of them. What has yours been? What does your setup look like when you're doing a home game or when you're doing an away game?
Well, the home game, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I just have a laptop in front of me, and I have one screen usually. It just shows a program feed, and I really only use it for replays. Because obviously the game's out there in front of me. So the road situation, we did 1 game the other night. We had a couple of different monitors set up. One was the program feed. One was the what they're calling the quad shot around baseball, I guess. It's four pictures in one screen, one of each bullpen, a kind of an all-9 shot high home camera, and then a picture of the scoreboard, basically. It's effective. We tried something the other day to try to kind of blow up that the all-9, the high home shot, but we didn't get a real good picture at it, so it wasn't all that helpful. Hopefully, by the next time we have a road game to deal with, it can be a little bit better. So, I mean, whatever. It is what it is. It's more than anything, Aiden. It's just routine and repetition and learning what it takes to do a game from a remote location.
What does it take to do a game from a remote location? I don't know how involved with the producing side you are, but at least from a broadcasting side, what else does it take that you normally wouldn't have to do?
Well, I think, as far as what I wouldn't normally have to do, I just think there are maybe some other things. There are a lot of things that come to mind as you look around the ballpark, and you're describing things that are around the ballpark, and, doing it on radio, you always want to try to be a little more descriptive. So there are those mental cues that, I see something on the field, and that reminds me let's talk about the dimensions of the park, or let's talk about things of that nature. And usually when you're there, you can just look up at the center field wall and say, well, it's 408 feet to straightaway center, or, it's 329 down the left field line, or whatever. you got to look that stuff up, or at least know where to find it pretty quickly if it comes up, or if you want to mention it. So, little things as far as preparation in that regard. But from the actual mechanics of the play-by-play, I think more than anything, just trying to, until you have a real good handle on what that ball looks like coming off the bat on a screen, as opposed to with your eyes, I think the biggest thing is to maybe lay back a little bit and don't paint yourself into a corner with what you're saying, while the ball's in flight and maybe it's not hit as well as you thought based on what you've seen on the monitor. Or maybe it was hit way better than you thought, that kind of thing.
I know that talking to players is such a big part of your job because it's something that you use so much, especially in baseball when you're trying to fill time in between pitches. How have you been able to, obviously you can't walk into a clubhouse now and talk to these guys. How have you been able to keep those relationships steady and get the same stories that you'd be able to get under normal circumstances?
Well, we just flat out can't. I mean, you can try to text guys a little bit. I know, some other broadcasters have, direct messaged players on Twitter. We kind of have to rely on the one or two guys we have in the clubhouse that are part of the PR staff. And it does require you to be maybe a little bit more forward thinking, because you can't just rely on the fact that, I'm going to catch the guy in the hallway on the way to batting practice or whatever, or catch him at his locker right after BP, something like that. That's not going to happen. So if there's something you need, you might have to lay the groundwork, even early in the morning, and just to give your guy in the clubhouse, or your woman in the clubhouse, PR person, whatever, to say, hey, can you go and talk to so-and-so and ask them about this? So it may require you to be a little more forward thinking on things of that nature, but it's not the same. That's for sure. I mean, and I think that's the biggest thing that we as broadcasters miss out on, is that, you've always been able to bring the flavor of what the club is like and what the mood around the club is like, and you don't really have that.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit about how this season has gone so far. Let's kind of dive into your career a little bit. When was the first time that you knew you wanted to be a broadcaster, and when was that first moment for you?
Well, I don't remember one specific moment. I guess it probably came in college, though. I was doing a lot of work writing for the newspaper, and really enjoyed it. And there was a moment early on when I thought that something in sports media, it's where I first sort of, recognized that was an actual career choice, I guess. I mean, I had always listened to baseball and watched baseball and sports and on radio and TV, and it was always a part of my growing up, but I guess I never really envisioned myself as being someone who would work in that industry. But again, I got into college, and when I started writing, I thought, well, this is something I could pursue. And I had, again, always enjoyed broadcasting and listening to baseball on the radio, in particular baseball. And just started doing games for the campus radio station. More than anything, it was kind of like, hey, maybe it'll be fun to do. Let me just try it. And it was somewhere along in there where I realized that, being at an event was what I wanted, what I most wanted to do in the business. Now, that having said that, I mean, I was looking to get a job. So when I got out of college, I just wanted a job. But I think I realized that really what I wanted was to do play-by-play at some point, at some level, in some sport.
So you did a lot of writing in college, and I think that's how a lot of broadcasters get started in the field. What is your take on the importance of being a good writer, not just only as someone who's done studio work, but also how does that kind of tie into play-by-play?
Well, I think, written communication, first of all, it teaches you the language. So in that regard, there's no better training. I just think the other things that I learned were writing on deadline. I think it forces you to organize your thoughts and organize, when you're organizing a story on deadline, the guys who do it really well, it's something, it's a real skill and a real talent. I don't want to say anybody can sit around and write something if they have enough time, but it's different. And it takes a certain brain and a certain skill to, again, organize that. And I think that goes hand in hand with being able to organize your thoughts while you're broadcasting. Whether it's, written for studio, whether it's written for a packaged piece, whether it's written for print. Writing is everything. And I would encourage any young broadcaster or, whatever line of work they want to get into in the realm of sports and media. And I mean, in today's day and age, way more so than when I was coming through college. Talk about needing to be concise. I mean, the world is 140 characters for a lot of people, right? It's Twitter. I mean, and it's written communication, and it requires, you to be smart and succinct and quick, and all these things that writing on deadline can help you achieve.
You end up with a major league job just 3 years out of college. What was that process like for you? How did you end up with it? And what were your thoughts being in professional baseball after just having just graduated basically not even 5 years ago?
Yeah, well, when I got to work with the Rangers the first time, I was a talk show host, and I was kind of a weekend fill-in host. And my experience coming out of college, most of my experience had been in talk radio. And I was kind of a freelancer, if you will. I just did everything I could think to do or find work, trying to get a paycheck anywhere I could. And, it was during that time. I mean, obviously I was elated to not only be working, A, in a major market, B, for a professional, around a professional sports team's, broadcast, but also to be doing it at home. For me, that's where I grew up, and it was the team I grew up rooting for. And I was working at least nearby to the guys I grew up listening to. So for me, it was very exciting. And it also taught me a lot. It taught me that I think that experience, more than anything that I've done, made me realize how important for me it was to do play-by-play, to pursue play-by-play. And I wanted to give that every opportunity because, nothing against being in the studio. Some people love the job. I didn't love it. It wasn't my thing. It wasn't my passion, if you will. Now, it would have been a great job, and it would have been a wonderful job to have for a long time. But I knew from having done a little bit of both, what I wanted was to be at the event, to be in that chair describing the event, more than anything else that I could have possibly done in the business.
You talked about taking that gamble, and obviously a big part of that but a big part of you getting the Phillies job was because you had experience in the major leagues already. What did you learn from being with the Rangers at such a young age?
Well, honestly, one thing I learned was don't take anything for granted. I mean, for me, it didn't work out in Texas. And there are, any number of reasons why that was the case. But when I first got there, I worked there, I went to the minor leagues, I came back there, and I really wanted that. Like I could have, why not just stay there forever? But it didn't really work out. The opportunity to do play-by-play didn't stay there, and it wasn't there for me. So when I went there, it was awesome, and I loved the experience. I knew that this business, it doesn't always stay the same. Things change, and there's so few jobs at this level in the major leagues that you want to hold on to it as long as you can. And when you get to a place that works for you, that you like, people around you like, and they treat you well, then you want to stay there for as long as you possibly can. So I think that's one of the things that I learned from that experience, was that this is a tough business. It can be tough to stick around. So and you can't always write your own ticket. I mean, like I said, you want to work for your hometown team. That's great, but it didn't work out there. So we moved on.
You said that you were experiencing a different thrill from play-by-play that you weren't necessarily getting in a studio environment. Do you still feel that same thrill doing Phillies games every day?
Yeah. I mean, even without fans in the stands, more so, I think maybe when the fans are there. This has been a weird experience so far this year without that, but there's just nothing better. I just the energy of the crowd is something that I think gets to all of us. It sticks with all of us, and I don't care whether you're announcing or you are an actual fan in the stands. I mean, there's a reason why people like to go to sporting events, and it's not always just the event itself. It's what's around the event and the way it's communal, and the way we interact with one another. I mean, it's something that as much as anything, that's probably is something we've missed as a country in 2020, and it's the ability to be together like that and to have a shared experience. Hopefully, one that is a good shared experience. You know what I mean? I still absolutely get that thrill every day, and I think one of the things that I love about it, and I've always loved about it, is that you start the game at 7:05 or whenever that first pitch comes in, and you know that anything can happen. You absolutely never know what you're going to see at the ballpark, and I think that's one of the things we all love about the game.
Back to the Rangers for a second. You left there after a few years doing pregame and postgame and some studio stuff and whatnot. How difficult was that decision for you to leave what was otherwise a pretty good job and go to the middle of nowhere, head on to minor league baseball and try to start being a play-by-play guy?
Well, it was a leap. I mean, I was, I guess, 26, 27, somewhere in that range, a few years out of college. And I think I was 27 when I went to my first year in the minor leagues. And, there were some other announcers in the league. Certainly it was low A ball that were younger and whatnot. But there just weren't that many opportunities to do play-by-play where I was at. And it was Eric Nadel and Vince Cotroneo who both, were both there with the Rangers at the time. And they both said, look, if you really want to do play-by-play, and if you really want to do baseball play-by-play, you're going to have to go to the minor leagues. I mean, there's just really no other way around it. Unless you get just supremely lucky and you're just uber talented, you're going to need to go to the minor leagues and work. And I remember Eric telling me at the time, he said, one of the things you might find out is you may not like it as much as you think you like it. Because working 6 days and 7 days a week is a particular kind of grind that not many people are accustomed to, and not ever having a night off is something that not a lot of people are accustomed to. And you definitely build your life a little bit differently, but I think you have to experience it to understand it. So, I went, I thought, I'm going to try it. I'll see what it's like. I'll see if I'm any good at it for real. We'll see what happens. I'll kick around there. I kind of was sort of like, I want to, maybe by the time I'm 30, I'll figure out what's there for me out there. And if it doesn't work, I was engaged at the time, and my wife was, my wife to be was very, very supportive of it. And so fortunately for us, it was a good move, and it worked out, and, got a good minor league job at that. So I didn't have to go bouncing around the minors. I could stay in the same place all 3 years, and before going back to Texas. And I got that that little bit of play-by-play experience I needed to sort of take the next step. So,
how big of a convincing, how much of an argument did you need to make to yourself, not even just your family, but to yourself, to say, I'm going to do this and I'm really going to try to make it to the major leagues again?
Yeah. I think you always have to try to believe in yourself, in whatever you do. What I think what took so long for me to understand is that just how subjective it is, and you can do everything right. You can do play-by-play the right way, from a purely mechanical standpoint. You can sound good on the air. You can sound, your demo can sound terrific. You can have great highlights, and you can even have some good connections. But then at the end of the day, it comes down to somebody saying, "Yep, I like you better than the other guy," and that can be a very that can be a tough thing for that person doing the hiring to even explain to you. They can just say, we really liked you, but we just like the other guy a little bit better. And that can be hard to take. And so for a young broadcaster, it's really difficult. You have to believe in yourself that you're doing it the right way. You solicit a lot of opinions. A lot of people can tell you you're doing it the right way and to stay with it. But sometimes there's just luck involved. And for whatever reason, you're available, and there's a certain job available, and there's a certain person doing the hiring, and it just clicks. It all comes together, and it works out. Because I know there are a lot of really good announcers in the minors. There's a lot of really good announcers that I worked with that could have very well been in the position I'm in right now. So I think I'm not saying you don't work hard. I'm not saying you don't try. You don't put a lot of effort into your career, but there's definitely some luck involved.
I know that when you interviewed with the Astros, you didn't get the job. And before you were about to interview for the Phillies job, you asked them about why you didn't get the job with the Astros. And they said they felt like you didn't want it enough. What was that? Kind of ties into what we were just talking about just kind of pure luck. But what did that feel like to have somebody say, you are in the minor leagues, obviously you knew you wanted the job, but for them to say, we didn't feel like you wanted the job or enough.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of eye-opening. And again, I didn't, this was, weeks after the fact, and I didn't quite, I don't know. I was just kind of taken aback by it, because I thought, well, of course I want it. Who wouldn't want the job, I still don't really know, what it was, whether it's my body language. I mean, I'm in a room with a whole bunch of people, and there were a lot of people involved in that decision. And I'm not like begrudging them in any way. It turned out to be, actually a usable critique. Again, they wouldn't have brought me in if they didn't like my resume and they didn't like my demo. I wouldn't have gotten that far. But to know that they were, there was just something about it, my personality or whatever, just didn't connect with them. And so, I've told the story before, but when I went to Philly, I said, hey, I'm not sure how it's going to how I'm gonna come across today when we all sit around a table and talk. But I want you to know I really want this job. I mean, if there's a chance to do play-by-play at the major league level every single day, then I want it. This is what I want. So let me just put that on the table right away. And I don't know if that helped or what, but it was good for me to know going into it for sure.
How do you feel like in that Phillies interview, you set yourself apart from every other broadcaster that was doing the interview?
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I think again, I'm not sure how many people they interviewed totally. I think it's just one of those things where there's a little bit of luck involved because again, they call you in because you've passed a bunch of hurdles purely based on your tape, and your work product, your work history. I know there were some good recommendations that people gave me. They called on my behalf, and that probably helped. But it's hard to say. Probably a better question for those guys than for me.
It's interesting that you talked about people who gave you the recommendations because obviously did you feel like you had a leg up at all on any of the other guys because you had worked in Major League Baseball before and knew some of these guys? Like you said, in Texas, you knew Eric Nadel, you knew Vince Cotron, you knew a lot of these guys and they were willing to go to bat for you?
I don't know if I felt like it was a leg up necessarily, but I didn't think it would hurt. At the time that I actually interviewed, they weren't sure that there was going to be a play-by-play position. They were also, kicking around the idea of just hiring a studio host, and which was basically the job that I had at the time in Texas. So, again, I don't know how much that set me apart. I think more than anything, it was just good that I had some experience having done play-by-play at the big league level. Even if it was just a little bit, to have had a little bit of experience, I think that was important for the Phillies, in their decision-making, I think.
So much of this business, obviously based on connections, other than the major league connections, what minor league connections or non-major league connections have helped you along this journey?
Well, I mean, I could go back. The first guy I did high school football games with was a connection, and maybe not as much a connection, but a resource. Somebody who helped me with some of the very basics of play-by-play from the very beginning. A guy working in Dallas-Fort Worth by the name of Pete Stein. I mean, I was still in college, and I was going out doing being the color analyst on Plano East High School football. And I was probably making about $20 to do it or something like that. So everybody. There's so many people that have a hand in it, and I work on press row as a college radio play-by-play guy, and somebody I meet there helps me get my first job, and somebody at my first job helps me get my second job, and somebody at my second job helps me get the third job. There's umpteen people that I could probably draw out for you that have made a difference in terms of, all those dominoes falling in order. The thing with the Phillies was by that point I had enough of a resume that I would have gone anywhere, and I probably, could have been in the running a few different places. And I don't know that, Eric Nadel, I know, called on my behalf. To the Phillies. Now, the people with the Phillies didn't know Eric. They, of course, knew of him at that point. I don't know what Eric said, but again, I don't know if it helped, but it didn't hurt. That's for sure.
When you were doing those lower level games, the high school football games, like you said, like the Plano East, Texas, whatever, when you're doing those lower level games, how important was it for you to stay focused on the main goal of, I'm going to get back to the major leagues, I'm going to get back to the professional level?
Well, I mean, I think at that stage when I'm doing games there, it's more just am I doing it right? And I think as much as anything, you have to look at it as work, as practice, as trying to get better. And you can go out and do, as a young announcer, you can go out and do sporting events at your local high school or whatever level it is. Heck, if you want to do it into a tape recorder or into your iPhone or whatever, there's value in that. If you're going to sort of proactively critique yourself and actually go through the tapes and figure out what you did right, figure out what you did wrong, and use it as a learning tool to get better for the next time out. So I think for anybody at that stage, it can be frustrating sometimes if it can be real easy to get into that trap where you feel like you're better than that level, but I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of people out there trying to do this job. And you still with me? There's a lot of people out there trying to do this job. And I think there's always somebody ready to replace you. And if you want to stand and stomp around and say, well, I deserve more than this. I'm better than doing a high school game or whatever. Then it's probably it might be hard for you to get back to that next level, or climb the ladder to the next level. I think every experience is good experience because if you use it the right way, it can make you better for the next time.
You said that in the beginning of your time with the Phillies, your play-by-play was about as rudimentary as possible because you felt like your biggest responsibility was to get Larry Anderson on as much as possible. How has that changed over your time, or not changed over your time with the organization?
I think it's probably changed a little bit. I mean, I feel like now I'm far more comfortable with the routine and the mechanics and the play-by-play part of it. So I feel like some of that is it grew out from there. But I just felt like what I meant by that comment was I think it was my second year back, kind of doing it for a full game every night, and it had been a while since I'd done that. So more than anything, it was trying to make sure I did just kind of the basic bare bones play-by-play the right way. And I think hopefully I've layered back in some of the other things, better details, better descriptions, more enthusiasm, more excitement, whatever. Hopefully I've more stories, more color, more commentary, whatever, through the years that I'd like to think I'm better at it now than I was then, but who knows, maybe not.
So you would say probably then that your play-by-play has gotten more intricate over your years at the Phillies?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. I mean, I don't want to, not to overthink it, but there's probably things. I guess if you went back and really listened, maybe there's things I didn't do then that I do now, and vice versa. Things that I do now that I didn't do then. Is it better or worse? I don't know. That's for somebody else to decide. I feel pretty comfortable with the way I do the games, and I try to still check myself and make sure I'm doing the things I should be doing, and I still try to solicit opinions, and again, I hope I'm better than when I started.
I've talked to basketball radio guys, and they basically said the bare bones for basketball are court, location on the court, player ID, time, score. You talked about the bare bones that you were working on for when you first got that Phillies job. What would you say the meat and potatoes of a baseball radio call are?
Yeah, balls and strikes, score, inning, and the ball. Where's the ball? Um, Again, different from basketball. Different, in a way, it's got a little more of an ebb and flow. Like football, there's a sort of a designed stop. Pitch is thrown, nothing happens. Designed stop. Space for the analyst, right? Same thing with a football play. Something happens, design stop, analyst can take over, play-by-play guy can be ready to set up the next play. But I think that's sort of the meat and potatoes. It's what's the count, what's the score, basic scoreboard stuff. I've heard the adage so many times that for a baseball player, everything you need to know is on the scoreboard. And I think for an announcer, there's some of that too. Are you doing it on TV? Are you doing it on radio? Those are two very different things, obviously. But for a radio baseball play-by-play announcer, that's what I would say is the meat and potatoes and the mechanics of doing a game.
You talked about the structure of football play-by-play, where there's a structured point where the play-by-play starts and the analyst ends, and kind of it's more or less that way probably in basketball a little bit too. Basketball is probably a little bit more free flow, but how does that help or hurt you, not only on radio but also on TV, when you don't really, it's more of baseball is probably the most conversational sport there is. It's not really a structured point where you're going to take over and your analyst is going to stop. How does that impact you when you're calling a game?
Well, I mean, it can impact you. I think, staying with, trying to stay conversational, trying to keep stories together, especially when the game allows it. Either the game is out of hand, or you're at a point in the game in the middle innings where perhaps maybe there's not a whole lot else going on. The game's not hanging in the balance, that sort of thing. Certainly at the very beginning of the game, there's so much to set up. And so you're not really in the same conversational mode when you first start. And then I think for most of us, you get everything set in those first couple of innings, and then you fall into, that, okay, now I don't know. Imagine, I use the analogy of somebody going to a game, right? Let's say they're going to a game with their kids, and you get there, and there's all this stuff to do right at the beginning, right? Where's the ticket? Which seat are we in? What row are we in? Do we want to get something to drink before we go to the seats? Do we need to get a hot dog? Finally, we get in our seats, and we can kind of chill out and sit back. We can talk to one another, watch the game unfold. And then as it gets later and the game's on the line, you tense up, So baseball has a unique ebb and flow that way, I think. And every game can be different. That's also pretty cool. And sometimes you just let the game be the game. And sometimes you have to work at it a little harder to converse and kill time and things like that. So, I think you start on a good conversation track, right? And I don't know, something happens on the field, you're prompted of a story or a remembrance of something, and you've just drawn some great story out of your partner, and you're on radio, and it's your partner's story, but you're the one doing play-by-play, and you've got to let him deal with the story, but you've got pitches happening, and you're kind of towing the line to doing a TV broadcast on the radio because maybe some details are slipping by while he's telling a story. So you kind of have to turn it around and find your spots to, okay, well, there was ball one, or there was strike two, he threw a curveball there, whatever. And then sometimes you're just simply left with the idea that you're just hoping that the next pitch isn't put into play because you want to hear the conclusion to this story, right? And sometimes that's just dumb luck.
Dumb luck. Perfect way to put it. Other than kind of setting the scenes and the basics, who's playing, what does this game mean, blah, blah, blah. How else do you kind of set the scene at the beginning of that broadcast when you, like you said in your analogy, first get to the ballpark? How do you kind of do that, and how do you go about starting off a game?
Well, I used to kind of have this mental checklist in my mind, and it's still there, but I don't think I run through it like a list as I used to. Whether it's, okay, I got to tell who the umpires are. I got to tell who the coaches are. I got to tell what they're wearing. I got to talk about the uniforms. I got to set everything on the defense. I think now I'm more comfortable, and maybe is better for the listener, I think. Maybe not, I don't know. But I've just tended to spread it out a little bit more. Instead of trying to shoehorn everything into the top of the first inning or all through the first. There's always, sponsored stuff you have to get to as well. And again, you might have a 8-batter first inning. You might have a 3 up, 3 down on 7 pitches, right? You don't know. So you get in what you can get in, but you don't necessarily need to just bullet point everything right away. You can let it unfold. You can, it's okay. If you don't get to the umpires till the bottom of the first or the second or whatever, I think that's okay. I used to not cut myself a lot of slack in that regard, but I've kind of changed my thinking on that over the years. And, it's okay to allow some of those details to unfold a little more slowly.
When you got to the Phillies, that was really the first time in a while that you had done solo play-by-play. The vast majority of your prior experience had been just solo. And now you're jumping in, working with a color analyst. What was that like, getting started, having gotten the job? Yes. You're in the major leagues. Yes. You got to be excited, but you're also in a very much different situation than you'd ever been in front of. What was that like, having to work with a color analyst?
Yeah, I almost all the games I'd done were solo, and so you're your own analyst in that regard. And there's freedom in that. There's also a lot of work involved with that, a lot of sort of mental taxation with that, trying to keep the gears going and learn how to talk throughout the whole broadcast. But it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier when I knew I had this really funny, dynamic, personable guy next to me, and while he wasn't doing play-by-play, he had a ton of stories he could share. And so it was up to me to try to get some of those stories out of him. And as I said, I think we towed the line a lot in terms of, that radio TV balance. And we might have to let some details go by, but we hoped in the end it meant that our listeners could be maybe more entertained by the fact that we had this analyst who was telling funny stories and good anecdotes. And again, try to be respectful of, allow that to happen, but within the context and the framework of that night's game. If it was 2-2 in the 8th inning, it wasn't time for that. It was time for details. It was time to make sure people knew what was still going on. And sometimes you hit the mark and sometimes you don't, I guess. But I think that's the way Larry and I both tried to approach it. And for me, as I said before, it had been a while since I'd done any play-by-play, really night in and night out, other than some spotty, like somebody's sick tonight, can you do the middle 3 innings kind of deal. So for me, it was just kind of getting back into that routine and then, let Larry be Larry.
You talk about having such a great color analyst with Larry. How difficult was it to get him involved more, having not really, like you said, worked with a color analyst before? Was it more difficult for you to have to kind of think okay, now I'm going to give more time to Larry. I'm going to give this next pitch to him, and I'm going to lay out for a little bit. How difficult was that? Not just as selfishly wanting more time on the broadcast, but also having to be the guy in the booth as kind of the traffic cop and having to make sure he gets his time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to say it was smooth sailing from the start and every game was great or whatever, but you know, we formed a pretty quick friendship in off the air, and that helped us. I don't want to say it's an automatic that everybody has to have that, because I know some guys they may not be best friends with their on-air partner, but you know, we had a really good rapport and a really good relationship right away. That helped. And I think once we got into really doing it, I mean, I remember sharing with him a few times, like, hey, this is our broadcast. I cannot always set you up, because if I'm spending all my time setting you up, then you're going to run out of time to swing at the pitch, right? Like, the next pitch will come and he will not have been able to hit a home run with his great story, right? Because we've moved on. So part of it was incumbent on him to understand that this is the time that we've got, and you're going to have to be a little more forward, and you're going to have to just jump out there. Now, there are certainly times when I set him up for a particular story, or I'm mining for something. I know he's got a story about such and such guy, and I think it'd be great to hear it. And so I say, so Larry, tell me about ... But I also know that just trying to tell him, like, look, you see something in between pitches, go for it. Here's what he's throwing. Here's the way he's swinging. Here's what he's trying to do. This, that, and the other. So don't wait for me to ask you that question. Hey, Larry, what is he doing right now? Like, first of all, it sounds sort of contrived. And this way, Larry can just simply see it and react. Doesn't mean he has to every time. But he can, you know, join in when he feels it's appropriate. You know?
How great was it to have a guy like him in the booth? It's your first major league play-by-play job, and you've got such a great analyst. How much easier did that make the transition for you?
It was great. Great analyst, great person, very well liked within the organization and around town. In our city, he still is extremely well liked. So I think all of those factors. I mean, I could not have asked for any better situation, quite frankly. You know, you as a young announcer will go anywhere to do the job you want to do. If any of the 30 teams had offered me that position, I would have taken it. And to land somewhere that I have a partner that I like, who's great to work with, a boss that I like, it was great to work for, and a town that I like, it was great to work in. I can't ask for much more than that. In fact, I just can't ask for that. I was just very, very lucky to land with that.
Last question, then I'll get you to the final three that I get everybody out on. You've said that you like to imitate Eric Nadel a little bit and take parts of what you like in his calls and bring them into you. How do you bring those aspects into one of your calls while at the same time still making it sound like a Scott Franzke call?
I mean, I think the calls, I mean, they are, at this point, they kind of are what they are. I don't know if I think about it as much. I think when I think about Eric, I think about the detail that he can bring. I think about the humor that he brings, and I still find myself, honestly, having listened to him throughout my childhood and throughout sort of my baseball awakening, if you will, to really kind of maybe even at your age, you know, really thinking about the broadcast in terms of, you know, what it sounds like. I mean, I still, and for all those years doing pre and post games and how many hours I spent listening to Rangers baseball, I still find myself today, if I'm telling jokes or saying things on the air that are somewhat humorous, I can actually hear Eric kind of in my head as part of the conversation. I may actually be talking to Larry or whatever, but I can actually hear Eric as part of the conversation, his laugh, his delivery, whatever. But I think what I've tried most to emulate with Eric was, just being up to par with descriptions and details and being right. Being right about the game, being right about the rules or whatever. I always felt like Eric was, I always felt like he just never messed up. He just never messed up on things like that. And I never wanted to mess up on things like that either. And I think that comes from having been around him and having listened to him for so long.
Last three that I get everybody out on: who's a broadcaster that you always wanted to meet, never got a chance to?
Who's a broadcaster that I always wanted to meet? Well, I could say I didn't really meet Mark Holtz, who was Eric's partner for many years. I met him, but I mean, it was way briefly. Like, I was an intern, and I never spent any real time with Holtzy, but I spent time with him. He never spent time with me. I spent a lot of hours with Mark Holtz. I think I don't see how you couldn't want to have spent time with Harry Carey at some point, right? Let's see, who else? I did meet Ernie Harwell when I was a young intern, being around the Rangers. But I think I would have liked to have spent a little more time hearing what some of his stories and learning more about his life, his career, and how he would have done the job.
Favorite stadium that you've gotten a broadcast from, or arena?
Well, I mean, I love our home ballpark at Citizens Bank, but for me, it's, I guess, the classics. Fenway. I love Dodger Stadium. I just love going and doing games at Dodger Stadium. There's just something about it that I still remember going there the first time and walking in that place. And, I'd seen it so many times on television, but the first time you go there, and it was when I was with the Phillies. The first time I go there, I'm in my early 30s, and I was just I don't know, I was kind of blown away by it. It was just it's unique all to itself, and the colors you see in person, the TV cannot deliver it. You just can't do it. You got to be there in person.
Last question that I get everybody out on: what advice do you have to young kids that want to get into the sports broadcasting industry?
Let's see. You got to love it. Number one, you got to really love it, because somebody will be there to do the job for less. The other thing is, I said it earlier, Aiden, but no experience is bad experience. There's value in all the work that you do. So whether the experience is on a radio station, on a webcast, on a tape recorder in your bedroom, there's still good experience to be had. And it's about preparing for it. It's about delivering it, and then it's about critiquing it so you can be better the next time.
Scott, if people want to find you and connect with you, where can they do that?
You can find me at the Phillies booth, is quite frankly. Franzke at Phillies.com.
Scott, thanks so much.
Hey, you bet, Aiden.